Welcome to Generation AI podcast. Here we talk about AI, data, and the future of innovation. I'm Mihai. I've been in AI many years. This is Callum. He'll be covering the business aspect, and together we'll be going on a journey from the business side all the way to the tech side and understand how we can create value. With this being said, let's dive in our first episode. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pumped. I'm feeling like I'm ready to record our first podcast episode. And we've got a packed show to get through, so let's get stuck into it.
Sounds good. I think the first topic to go in is the current state of AI. Obviously, AI is everywhere. Every post has AI. Every company wants to do AI. AI is literally everywhere. So I think it's worth looking into how the current landscape looks like. I feel like we're in a very good wave where AI is everywhere, people building AI, people using AI, people concerned about AI. So why don't we go there? How do you feel about the current state of AI? It's everywhere, right?
Yeah, so this topic was more around the rise of LLM hype, right? So
Exactly. Yeah, I wanted to go there. Yeah. And the reason why I wanted to talk about LLMs is I feel there's a ton of confusion in the market that AI is just LLMs. And don't get me wrong, ChatGPT and all the startups have been doing a great job over the last 2+ years to bring this to market in a way that's super easy for everybody to use. I just feel people think that AI equals language models. And even though they're cool, there's so much more depth to AI than just language models. There's specialized models, there's boring things that still add value to technology. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about AI equaling LLMs nowadays?
I'm kind of bored of the LLM hype because I think we're still in a place where there's been a lot of products and a lot of demos, but it hasn't yet filtered through into our everyday lives. Sure, we prompt with ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT for all kinds of things. But we're still a long way from actually realizing the fundamental power of AI, which is the ability to make our lives easier, to improve the quality of human life. And I think that's ultimately what AI will do. And we'll look back on this kind of prompt engineering phase of AI development and think of it as quite quaint. Even though at the time it seems like radical innovation, I think it's nothing compared to what's to come.
Right, and I think it's worth noting that AI has been around for many years. AI has been around since the 70s, 80s, when people were first discovering how you can teach models, how you can make software behave intelligently with data. Of course, there's been many ups and downs. It's worth noting about the AI winter that happened in the 80s, when people felt like machines are getting there, are getting intelligent, but they could still not solve all the problems. Of course, there was more compute coming, there was more data coming, algorithms became more and more intelligent. And I think around the 2000s, when GPUs came out, people discovered that, hey, they're great for gaming. We can play games, but they're also good at matrix multiplication. And this is how it spiraled down and GPUs started to be used in AI. And fast forward 2 years ago, fast forward 2017, the fundamental paper behind language models came out. It's called Attention is All You Need. And this is when things started to get really interesting. And 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we saw OpenAI launching ChatGPT. And I think this is where the wave started to pick up, I would say, exponentially. But again, I feel like we're living in a quite big language model hype where people tend to focus too much on this instead of focusing on how do you actually deliver value. There's multiple other ways of delivering value outside of, as you said, prompt engineering and language models. Let's pick just a very simple use case, right? Autonomous driving. Might not be simple, but it's outside of language models and is based solely on computer vision models and other ways of doing AI and other ways of handling data that's beneficial for humans. Where do you see Actually, let me ask a different question. What does this mean for consumers? You're coming more from the business side. What does this hype and hyper focus on just one side of AI mean for consumers?
I honestly don't know. I don't know where we are in the hype cycle. I'm focused more on the B2B side, so I don't really look at the consumer landscape. It's not something I spend any time thinking about. I think on the B2B side, we're still in a state where, as I say, the use cases, the demos are being realized, but we haven't yet found a way to actually determine real value. And the consumer landscape moves way quicker than the B2B landscape. So I think there's every possibility that actually AI is not overhyped in the consumer space, because consumers today are using AI far more than businesses are able to in an effective way. And that's because consumers can make decisions today and action those decisions tomorrow. It can take 5 years to bring in an enterprise application and make it an AI enabled in a business. So I think we've got to separate these concepts, because I don't think it's the same thing.
By these concepts, you mean enterprise AI versus consumer AI.
Exactly.
I was listening to a podcast today, and I think the numbers were under 5% in AI adoption for Fortune 500 companies. So as you said, big corporations tend to
But
lag behind.
that's not the whole thing, though, is it? Because what does adoption mean? Even if 5% of companies have adopted AI, to what extent have those 5% actually adopted AI through all their workflows? If 5% of companies have adopted AI in 5% of their workflows, the actual AI adoption is an order of magnitude lower than 5%, right?
For sure, and it also boils down to, what does AI adoption mean for a company? Are you fundamentally changing the way your clients interact with your product, or are you just adding AI for the sake of having AI powered on a pitch deck? I think there's a big difference between those two. How much of your business is data driven and AI driven versus non AI driven? And as you said, depending on where companies sit on the spectrum, can determine how many orders of magnitude they are under the 5% we just mentioned. If you'd be to throw if you throw a number on the percentage of adoption of AI in big tech, where would you say that would sit?
I have no idea. I have no idea where we sit in terms of adoption, but it's definitely less than 1%.
Understood. What I've noticed recently is that there's a ton of, for sure, hype around AI, but there's what they call a lot of toxic marketing in this area. So companies over-promising without actually having a product. And I see many consumers confused by what AI can actually deliver and how it actually creates value in their products, just because they see all those nice landing pages that promise AI overnight, but don't actually have a product. So for example, I had a discussion a few months ago with a person who was thinking that they could literally drop their Google Drive into some language model and get results the next day. And while this is the goal, right, of just throwing all your data into some multi-model model and have it answer generic questions, we're not there yet. And I feel like you need to manage expectations quite a lot when you work with consumers regarding what they can expect from language models and building AI in general. There's no magic wand. And I feel like the more specific your problem is, the more ROI you can have applying AI on it, rather than applying AI on a very broad problem, thinking that it will solve all the things.
Got it. Okay, let's move things on to the next topic. Keep the show moving. Right, so been thinking about what we can discuss in our first episode. And I want to talk about the AI churn wall, because I think that's what's coming down the track. And I think what is most interesting to look at when the listeners are trying to understand how to make the most of their AI use cases today, how to generate return on investment. The key things to actually understand is who is in the arena building AI products right now, who is leveraging value, and who is making a success of AI in the workplace today. And the reality is when you actually drill down on the number of companies that are actually integrating enterprise-grade workflows via AI, you can literally count the number of companies doing that on one hand, maybe two hands at most. One great example of a company that is really delivering in terms of the AI landscape today is a company called Synthesia. And that is led by a guy called Victor Rapabelli, Rapabelli. And he is really crystallized a point that I think is really important to talk about on this podcast today. He coined a term called the AI churn wall, and we'll leave a link in the show notes for the exact podcast. He basically did an interview with Harry Stebbins from 20VC about a month ago. And for anyone that doesn't know what Synthesia is and what it does, Victor is obviously the founder of Synthesia. And what it's really focused on is taking text, how most of the world's information is organized, and converting that into video. And even though Synthesia have raised their Series D, they just got a $2 billion valuation, they've got the who's who of VC investors invested in them. In the podcast with Harry, Victor freely admits that we're in an AI bubble. Now, I think this is interesting for a couple of different reasons. He admits that a lot of the AI companies that are building today won't necessarily be around in 3 years' time. But he also acknowledges that just as much as we're building for supply that isn't necessarily there, use cases that aren't necessarily validated yet, the demand picture is still unclear as well, because increasingly AI buyers just don't know what they want. And so he makes the point in the podcast that AI is facing a churn wall. We're actually getting to the point where the key point of differentiation in the AI lifecycle is not when all of these B2B AI companies sign their first contract, because anyone can sign a contract, right? It's not hard to sign a 50K POC. But actually, the point of difference is when those companies come to renew. And he makes the point that a number of the POCs that are being rolled out in enterprise organizations today, they're not going to get renewed. And so realistically, what's going to happen is you're going to have 500 AI companies build out POCs for enterprise companies, but maybe only a fraction of those are actually going to get renewed. And I think it's an often underappreciated point, is that we're still in a hype cycle where you can sign deals, but signing deals is not the same thing as retaining customers. What's your take on that?
For sure. You mentioned a few things I want to touch upon, but the first one is, why do you think this is the case? Do you think people are just playing around with AI, have a limited budget, they run a
I'm interested in
POC,
your
they
take.
have...
What's your take on this one?
I actually think people are hooked by the idea that you can have agents, language models, whatever other type of model, showcasing intelligent behavior and plugging that in your product so your customers feel more valued and that you can actually have a good ROI. But this is, I think people romanticize the idea of AI, that is this magic wand you can do so many things with. And I think that's a reason why people try AI in any form. That's why people sign POCs, because they want this value in their product. But in order to extract valuable ROI from AI, there's a ton of work. And the more you want to invest, the more you'll see the benefits. It's not like we do the POC today, tomorrow you have instant returns. You can have these returns over the next few months, over the next few years. There's so many things that influence how your POC or your product or your AI model behaves. How do you deal with data? Do you have a proactive approach of collecting the data so that when you build your AI POC, you maximize the chance that you're going to like what you see and that ultimately you'll renew this POC contract so you can transform it into a large-scale product instead of just hitting the churn wall, as you said. Regarding the bubble, I would agree we're in a bubble. And this, we can easily compare this to the dot-com bubble and other similar situations, right? I just think that AI is here to stay. We just need to understand what's hype and what's value, and we need to educate people towards picking use cases that are actually value and not just using AI for the sake of using AI. Because if you use AI for the sake of having AI on a pitch deck, you just increase the percentage of startups that churn just because they don't see real return on their investment. What's your point of view on the bubble? When do you think the bubble is going to burst?
I think there's a lot of loaded assumptions there, right? I don't think it's as simple as there being a bubble and when it's going to burst. I think there are a succession of bubbles, and some of them are related to each other and some of them are not. So, LLMs, you could argue that's a bubble, but there's so much money going into LLMs, it's not like it's just going to blow up overnight. Like NVIDIA's at a north of a $3 trillion market cap for a reason, right? There's real revenue there. So it's not like the dot-com era when, you had pets.com and these companies were basically made up. They had no money. They had no cash flow. These are real companies with real use cases. I think the difficulty is that the ROI isn't there yet. So I don't think you're going to have a kind of supply-side crash where companies go from 100 to 1 overnight on the supply side. I think what you're going to see is if the bubble is going to pop anywhere, the bubble will pop on the demand side, particularly at the enterprise, because there's only so long that a CIO can justify continuing to put budget into a project that isn't delivering value. I mean, you can almost imagine the scene. Imagine the scenario where it's for 6 straight quarters or 8 straight quarters that the CIO asks for more budget, more budget, more budget. And eventually, that CIO is going to get taken into a deep, dark corner by the CFO, and they're going to have a pretty impolite conversation because the CFO is going to be answerable to the board. And so that's how I think this is going to play out. And I don't think it's going to be a big bang necessarily, but I think at the organization level, there'll be a massive contraction and retrenchment in AI spending. Yeah.
You pointed out that you think that the bubble is going to pop, or the bubble will suffer when big companies will have problems justifying their AI spend. And I think the reason for that is that when a big company drops AI, it's big news, right? But what if we think about all the small hundreds of startups that are trying to do very niche things with AI? Do you think they'll continue to invest in AI or churn as well with the big companies? Do you think the big companies will drag after them many small companies?
Maybe. I mean, to me, I find it way more interesting, and this is where I want to take it next, is to where's the ROI today? Where are the use cases? Because I'm less concerned about the bubble. The bubble will come, the bubble will go. Human behavior is human behavior, right? It's very cyclical, it's very predictable. But what I want to take this conversation to next is where do we go after the bubble? What use cases are going to be around in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? And I think increasingly, I think the area that we need to look in is actually the most obvious areas. This is a great example here from 11 Labs in terms of the way that they're operating today. And similar to Synthesia, right? This is not about doing the complex enterprise-grade transformations, but it is as simple as turning text-based information into voice. So just for reference to the audience here, Spotify recently announced that they will now be hosting 11 Labs voiceovers or voice-narrated audiobooks on their platform. And so this is taking a really simple use case, but if you extrapolate this out and you look at companies like Synthesia and 11 Labs, where they're taking the world's information and then translating that into voice or video, the use case, the ROI is obvious and it's clear. And I think this is where the AI community needs to focus its time, because enterprise companies are dominated by large monolithic system of record companies. They're really complex to manage, really difficult to build around. So don't try and build around it. Do something completely adjacent to the enterprise software environment and take all of your text-based knowledge, turn it into voice, turn it into video. It's these kinds of use cases that I think we need to be focused on.
The use case you just mentioned is, text to speech is probably one of the most basic ones. And as you said, most of the information in the world is stored as text. And transforming it into speech could enable a new level of productivity for people. Just imagine, instead of reading a book, you now have audiobooks generated for every piece of text content you own. You can listen to that content while driving, while coding, while being productive in different ways. So I think what you said translates into the real ROI of AI, at least short and midterm, is going to be around how do we make people more productive? How do we complement the work that people do so that they can either achieve more in less time or get more creative and enable new use cases? So instead of doing this, let's just take coding as an example, right? I'm an engineer and I've been coding for many years now. With the tools I have now, I don't feel like in a few years I'm going to be replaced, but rather I feel like my work is so much easier now that I can think higher level. I can think, how do I build products instead of how do I code this small component in my piece of software? This kind of tools, code automation, speech to text, text to speech, summarization, these kind of things make life easier for people. And I think this is where the ROI would be. Of course, people have been talking about building rocket ships, right? Building super niche, very high-tech startups. Just look at the Humane pin that was discontinued, I think recently. The news came in that I think it's called Rabbit. You'll have it on the screen. It was a gadget that only had a camera and I think a microphone, and it was meant to be your private assistant. This might be too edgy for people to start using, right? The adoption of these kind of things might be doable in a few years, but right now people might not see the use case in having an assistant by their side. But keeping it simple and turning text in speech, speech in text, summarizing information is where AI excels and is where I think we'll see good ROI if executed properly.
And it gives Europe an opportunity, right? Like, I don't know if you know this, but Synthesia and 11 Labs are both based in London. So so you have the market-leading voice, you have the market-leading text-to-voice company and the market-leading text-to-video company, and neither of them are in Silicon Valley. So I think Europe has a real opportunity here to move faster, to be innovative, and the obvious use cases, like for instance, if you think about the really big companies that were built in the dot-com era, they enabled us to do things in a way that we had never done them before. You know, if you think of Amazon or Google, they transformed our experience of the world around us. So I think when I hear, oh, I'm going to build Salesforce for AI, or I'm going to build Workday for AI, you know, I'm just going to take this large, big software product and I'm going to put an AI agent on top of it. I think it's so short-sighted, you know. It's almost like that classic Henry Ford quote. If you ask the consumer for what they wanted as a mode of transport, they'd ask for a faster horse, right? I feel like there's a load of people that have just built cars for the first time and are working out how we can get a horse to drive it to work. You know, it's a paradigm shift. And I think people really struggle to think in those terms. And I think this is one of the reasons why we haven't built the novel use cases and applications yet, because people think in incremental fashion. But it's like we've gone from no internet to internet. The use cases and the possibilities are beyond our imagination. And it will take a few really innovative companies to take some simple use cases and transform the way that somebody does something that we take for granted today. But I think we're literally less than 1% of the way into this, is my gut feeling.
And I think being 1% or being very early in this journey opens up many, many opportunities, because you get to build the tech yourself, right? You get to build the car that will replace the horse, to go back to the example you gave. And I think even though people are shooting for the moon with AI, I still think that the average person doesn't really want to build AI or touch AI. They just want a better life. They want more productivity. They want to do more work in the time they have, and they want to achieve more, right? If you can build a byproduct of AI that helps people do these kind of things, they don't need to interact directly with AI. Just how they don't. Let's make a comparison between AI and storage, right? Having storage systems over time allowed us to store pictures on our phones, store documents, have everything in a nice and structured format. And then companies came and built on top of those simple structures, right? We had Dropbox, we had Google. Now we have various ways of interacting with our storage. Storage became a commodity. What if AI becomes a commodity, right? And the price of AI gets so low, and it's only a matter of who builds the best user experience on top of the AI rather than who builds the next best model. This is where I think
moving. Yeah, I do, but I'm conscious of time. What is next up on the list?
linked to companies that are building the future. You mentioned we have Synthesia and big companies in the UK moving this needle forward. What about the recent announcement on Mira Murati launching Thinking Machines Lab? You know Mira Murati, right? She's the CTO. She's the former CTO of OpenAI. She's the person behind ChatGPT.
So what was
So
her
she,
role? Just so I understand, and for the listeners as well, what was her role in OpenAI exactly?
I can only speak based on the news and based on what she made public, but I think her role was in designing, building, and releasing ChatGPT, the tool that basically changed the way we think today and the tool that basically created the current bubble we're in. She resigned from OpenAI a few months ago, I think it was October, and people have been talking about what is she building? What's the startup that's gonna be built next by her? It turns out it's more like a lab. So there's no tangible product yet. There's no thing you can buy or the next ChatGPT you can use. But it feels more like she put together people from, I think, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, many of the leading companies in AI.
She already raised money.
I don't think so. I don't think she raised money yet.
Okay.
I saw some rumors on Twitter about a 100 million investment, but I don't think this happened yet.
These are like signs of the peak, right? Where you can just potentially raise $100 million without even building anything yet. Like, talk about being pre-product market fit. This is pre-company. I always thought it was weird with Mistral as well. Mistral was another strange one for me, where, okay, this guy, CEO of Mistral, is, by all accounts, an AI innovator. But he left Facebook, and within a couple of weeks of leaving Facebook, he raises like 100 million, right?
I think this is pre-product, but post-reputation. So people are like, you've built that before, you've built ChatGPT, you've built Mistral. you must do something really cool. You must do something that's going to provide a good enough ROI for us to just throw money at your company, whatever is building. How do
So
you
what do you
see
think?
this from,
I have a
how does
question for
this
you.
influence consumers? Go ahead.
What do you think around? What do you think is going to happen? Because the consensus seems to be that all of the foundation layers, all of these foundation models, is a race to the bottom. It's going to be completely commoditized, and and actually that's happening. DeepSeek is probably another example, and we don't have to go there in this episode. But over the long term, do these foundation models become commoditized? Where is the value going to accrue?
I still think there's a long way until the foundations will be completely laid out. I still think we're just building very thin skyscrapers now. We reach good heights, we reach levels where we have very interesting products, but I feel there's still a lot of room to build way more solid foundations. And if you look at the suite from Mira Murati, basically what they want to do, and is very abstract at this point in time, is what she says here: helping people adapt AI systems to work for their specific needs. So this feels more like a human in the loop approach, where people are complemented by AI and developing strong foundations to build more capable AI systems. This goes along with what I think is going to happen. I think there's still room to build way better foundations, so we can go even higher than we saw in the last 2 years.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. You didn't answer my question though.
What was the question again?
The question was, are the foundation models going to get commoditized?
At some point, yes. It's hard to say when that some point will be. It can be a few months from now, or it can be years from now, just because we see this interplay between hardware and software. Whenever the next piece of hardware is released, people build bigger and bigger models. And with bigger and bigger models, hardware companies are incentivized to create even more capable infrastructures. Of course, this feeds in the bubble, right?
So
That's why
what's
I'm
the,
saying it's
what
hard
is
to
the
get. Go ahead.
what's the mental model? Like, and I think this is a really interesting area of AI development in general. I'm really interested to get your take. So, like, you have the thesis previously was that you had hardware and software, and eventually, sooner or later, all the value accrues to the software layer. So you only need to look at the stock chart of a chip company throughout any time in the last 20 years, and the same trajectory every time. The chip companies lead the rally, you go up, and then they explode downwards, and eventually all of the value gets accrued to the software companies. Now, clearly, there is an application layer being built on top of LLMs, whether it's AI agents or agentic AI or however you want to call it, and then clearly there are chips underneath them in the form of NVIDIA's GPUs. So to what extent do you think the LLM companies have an opportunity to accrue value, or are they just going to become this generation's hardware?
I think the second hypothesis you raised is going to be true. So currently we have, let's say, a stack of two elements. You have good hardware. On top of good hardware, you have really good models. We've already seen that they get saturated in a way that there's only so much data you can ingest in a very, let's say, an infinite model. A model can be infinite. Data isn't really infinite, right? At some point, you'll run out of new data to feed the model. So I think they will become commoditized. They will become the hardware of the next generation. And the companies that will really succeed would be the companies that would put valuable data, proprietary data on top of those two layers of the stack. So we have hardware, software, and proprietary data.
And that
Large
brings me
language
on.
model companies might not have access to proprietary data, but companies that do and inject it in a way that's not leaking their IP out, I think they will succeed more than just companies building foundation models. This might not be true, but I think we'll soon start to see companies struggling to find valuable data to feed those models.
So you think the value is more so in the data rather than the models?
The models are as good as the data you feed them, right? And of course, they train the models with as much data they can get. And they made them available to all the people. And there must be a new race starting of who puts their best IP on top of those very generic models. That's why I'm saying we might get in a stage where the more proprietary data you have, licensed data, the more of this you have, the higher your value and ROI would get. And of course, there's a ton of proactivity to this because we might not be there yet, but the more you invest now in properly gathering your data, the higher the chances you'll succeed when models will become just a commodity.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we'll see how Mira does. I mean, this is probably one of the few people that worked at OpenAI that haven't started a competitor to OpenAI. So let's see how she gets on.
Cool. Very linked to this, I wanted to ask you a question. What do you think? We've mostly been talking about language models in this podcast, and this is the hypothesis that language models are just 5% of what AI is. What do you think about this whole hype around building LLM wrappers? Because this is linked to some of the things we spoke about.
I don't know.
What do you
I
think?
think we should explain what an LLM wrapper is first.
For sure, for sure. So we presented before the hypothetical new stack of AI, right? You have hardware at the bottom supporting all your operations, you have good foundation models, and then you have proprietary data. And this can mean a ton of data or just a few prompts that you play with, right? There's a spectrum of this proprietary data you might have, right? And language model wrappers are pretty much people just prompting the foundation model in a way that serves their purpose. So let's think of a language coach. This could be a good example of a ChatGPT wrapper. You take whatever they built, you take all that innovation, you just prompt it in a way that it acts as a coach. We can generate as many examples as we want, and we see already financial coaches. We see all these very incremental apps that build on top of foundation models. And this is what I call building plus ones. To give you a more, an old example, do you remember a few years ago when people were building flashlight apps for the iPhone? The marketplace was full of flashlight apps just because Apple provided the hardware, the phone, but they didn't provide the feature that you can use to turn on your flashlight. And people were building flashlight apps. The App Store was full of such apps. Apple realized this. So people were building plus ones, right? On top of what Apple offered. People realized this. Apple realized this. The next release, they came out with a flashlight app embedded in the operating system of the iPhone. All of a sudden, all the plus one apps in the market were obsolete, were useless, because Apple offered that by default. This is what I think is going to happen with the plus one LLM wrappers, as opposed to building 10x innovations. With a 10x innovation, I mean, how do you take a language model? How do you inject proprietary data? How do you remove the dependency on OpenAI, basically? Because when you build a language model wrapper, the moment the API OpenAI offers stops working for one reason or another, or becomes 10x more expensive, your business is gone. What do you think about this? What do you think this means for consumers from a business point of view?
I don't have a strong I don't have a strong opinion on rappers. I mean, I think yeah, I honestly don't have a point of view on rappers in particular. Probably something I need to do some more research on myself, to be quite frank.
Do you think consumers should try first with language models provided by providers, go validate their point of view, their validate the hypothesis of their product, and then build their own stuff behind the hood after they validated the.
Do you know, honestly, I think this is more of an engineering topic. Like I think this is something that engineers need to work out. I don't think businesses think about this. I don't think consumers think about this. Frankly, I don't think about this. This is kind of into the weeds of an engineering mindset. All businesses care about is outcomes, and they don't care if it's a wrapper, if it's not, if it's their own, if it's not. The CTO will care about it. The CTO will care about it because it will introduce, if you take the wrong development approach, it will introduce all sorts of technological debt. And eventually that will have a degradational effect on the commercial aspects. But the CFO doesn't care. The CPO doesn't care. Ultimately, I think it will all be driven by where does the value get accrued? Is there enough value for companies to just put a wrapper around ChatGPT, and in that case, they can roll out their own products, and it works fine? Like, I've worked in businesses that do that today, and it works great. What is the cost of doing it themselves? What's the ROI? These are all things that are yet to be determined. So I think we're way too early, and I think this is mainly an engineering consideration at this stage.
Yeah, I want to get your point of view on that because for sure, there's nothing wrong with wrapping around whatever other people built. It's great in the first stages of the product. Companies can iterate fast, can try new things, can deliver very fast ROI to their customers. This comes with a big risk of depending on whatever other companies have built, depending on OpenAI, depending on Anthropic, depending on whatever large language model or any other type of model provider they picked. And I think what I see companies do is they try really fast with wrappers. Once they prove the point that that specific AI can deliver value, they invest more into building their own solution. And then they keep the ROI without the dependency on the third-party provider, like OpenAI in this case. And to your point, yeah, it's an engineering question, but it's also a risk balancing question. And I think this is a good approach for companies trying out AI. They want to see quick ROI? For sure. Use a wrapper. Use something that's out there. Once you prove the point, go build it yourself so you can safeguard your business from all these third-party providers going extinct or doubling their prices.
Cool. Okay, I think that's a wrap for the first episode. Don't forget to tune in next week for the podcast. This is our first episode, so if you've managed to find us on the interwebs today, then you've achieved something pretty fantastic because we've not tried to promote this or market this in any way. But we'll be here at the same time every week, bringing you AI insights, entertainment, the occasional joke. And for this week's episode, thank you to the co-host over here, Mihai. My name's Callum. This is Generation AI podcast, and we'll sign off here. Cheers, guys.